So we are in part 2 this week of a 4-part sermon series called The Bigger Picture, where we are looking at the ways where we are taught to understand that it's not all about I, me, my, you. Right? It's not about the singular. It's about looking at the larger picture and having a wider lens to look at that larger picture, to say, yes, we have gifts, but it's not just about my self-interest with those gifts. And last week we encountered the first part of this chapter, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, and what we talked about a little bit was that we each have our individual gifts represented by these boxes, but that sometimes we act like children and do something called parallel play. Right? Some of you may be familiar with that concept with children, of parallel play. And instead of actually working together and doing things together, we use our gifts in these individual boxes of ours just for our own play and our own self-interest and our own self-building up, because we have been taught that the gifts and skills we have are to be used for our happiness and our doing something for ourselves to be able to build up our assets and other things to make sure that we are okay and our family is okay. And Paul's point to everybody else was that no, you are given these gifts for the common good. And that when we have these individual gifts, you just use them for yourself. It doesn't fulfill God's purpose of the common good. And what can also happen is that some people might have a gift and not know what to do with it. Have no idea where to apply it. And the reason they might not have an idea of where to apply it is because they're just trying to apply it in their own personal gain and own personal benefit, when the purpose of having it is for the common good in the first place. And then someone else might be like, hey, where's my gift? And they don't see their gift. And the reason they don't see their gift is it doesn't have anything to do with them. It doesn't have anything to do with them. It has to do with them applying that to the common good. And what we can see is that when gifts are brought together, when the two people, say, who are in parallel play, bring those gifts together, it can build a foundation upon which the people who have a gift and didn't know what to do with it suddenly say, you know what? Oh, now I know what to do with that gift. I'm supposed to build on that foundation and put my gift there. And the person who's like, where is my gift? I don't know what my gift is looking over here. They got this, but they need this other thing, and gosh, I can do that. I just figured everybody could do that. They can't do that? I guess that's where my gift is, and I can do that. And all of a sudden you have this thing, and all of a sudden it's a church. People working together, using their gifts for the common good. And we asked, what can you do? What are your spiritual gifts that you can bring to bear here in this community of faith? Not for the sake of this community of faith, but for the sake of the larger good. And we showed a short video of this picture, and for those of you who haven't seen it, look at the blow-up photos in the back and over here later today. But this photo here is made up of thousands of tiny images of you. Of you. From the year in review and other things that we did this year. Pictures of all of you in here that are built up and actually build up to create the church. Now, just like that, as individuals make up a church, so too does a church, when part of a larger denomination, build a larger church. And a lot of times when Paul is talking about members in the larger body of Christ, he's not just talking about individuals making up a church. He's talking about the various churches working together to be something that transcends that individual church, something that transcends time and space and connects us in a very powerful way. And some of the words that Paul uses that can be used for both individual and the communal, he's like, look, there's one body that has many members. And all the members are part of that one body. You can use the term members to be an individual as part of a single church, members part of the church of all times and all places, or a member church is part of a wider denomination. And if one place would say, because I am not a hand, I did not belong to the body, doesn't make you any less part of the body. And if you say, because I am one thing, therefore I'm not another, that doesn't make it any less part of the body as well. As it is, there are many members in one body. Now, what we're going to do today is something a little different. We're going to talk and learn a little bit more about our denomination, the United Church of Christ. It's not something we talk about a lot, the larger church to which we belong. And one of the reasons for that is we're not one of these like hierarchical churches, right, where the commands come from the top down and you got to do what they say. Like we are a bottom-up church. Each individual church, the United Church of Christ, has its own independent decision-making, ownership of property, and all that kind of stuff. When you're in a hierarchical church, and I'm not judging or saying which structure is better or worse, they all have strengths and they all have challenges. But when you're in a hierarchical one, you are very aware that you are part of a larger denomination. Here, it's easy to not be as tightly woven together and doing things together. So we're going to talk a little about this United Church of Christ and its theme of having a just world for all. A just world for all. Walking in the love and justice of Jesus to create a just world for all. Now, the United Church of Christ was created in 1957. You might say, whoa, Pastor, this church was like built back in the 1700s, wasn't there? Or at least this church was created in the 1700s. This building is the third building built in 1858. How could that be? How could it start in 1957? Well, most churches experiences the following. You start out as a single church, and then somebody doesn't like what's going on, and you split, and another church gets created, right? Dennis is shaking his head over here. And then in that church, all of a sudden, they have dissension, and that breaks up into another one. And you can see this whole chain throughout history of how all that's happened. We are the only church to do it in the opposite direction. Right? We've taken other denominations and other churches, and we have come together to create a new, united, and continually uniting United Church of Christ. So we're not going to go into like super detail, but I'm going to give you some things to give you a sense of what our denomination kind of looks like demographically and different things, and go from there, and hopefully there's something valuable about that. And if not, then hopefully I beg for your forgiveness, and we'll go from there. So there are 4,700 congregations in the United Church of Christ spread throughout the country, and there are about 748,000 members, 745,000 members, 230. Come on in. It's good to see you, Lucian. Go ahead and grab a spot over there. Glad you're here. So we have about 230 members. So if you take that out, take that 230 out there, there are 745,000 other people out there in the United Church of Christ ready to be part of doing something bigger that we can tap into if we want to do things beyond what we are doing here as a local congregation. So we are spread out throughout the country. There's also a presence in Canada and some of the Native American reservations and some other countries, but predominantly it's here in the United States, and it's split up this way, about 21% in New England, about 20 some odd percent in the kind of mid-Atlantic, and then you can kind of see the rest of the split. Not surprisingly, being a somewhat more progressive denomination generally, although not universally, we are not as present in the Deep South. What I hear continually is when people find us online from the South, they're like, will you please come plant a church here, down here in my town? Maybe we'll do that someday. We're not quite ready for that, but maybe we will. So the top 5 states, here's the list of the top 5 states in there. And if you can't see the words, I'll say them. Pennsylvania, Illinois, Ohio, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. And Connecticut kind of stands out because the other ones are so much bigger. Right? The other ones are so much bigger than Connecticut. Here's one of the reasons why Connecticut is one of the top ones, is because you could not found a town in the state of Connecticut without a congregational church. You weren't allowed. You started a town by the way you did it was starting a meeting house for a congregational church. This church started the town of Bloomfield. It was called Wintonbury back then, but this church started the town of Bloomfield, which is why if you go throughout Connecticut, you will find a congregational church in every town in Connecticut, and very often more than one, even if they don't need them. Right? Avon has 2. Hartford has like 5 or 6. Right? So they're, excuse me. But that's why in Connecticut we have so many disproportionately to other ones. So in terms of what the size of the types of churches, about 25% of the churches have 50 members or less. Not 50 people attending on a given Sunday, 50 members or less. All right? And another 25% have between 50 and 100. Now remember, we're right around that 200 range. So imagine us on the right side of that red box. So about 75% of the churches in the United Church of Christ are smaller than this community of faith, and about 25% of them are about our size or larger. So then in terms of what types of places do we tend to be in? The United Church of Christ tends to focus in areas that are towns of 25,000 or less. So about 2/3, just a little less than 2/3 of all the churches in the United Church of Christ are in towns that are in towns of 25,000 people or less. And interestingly, Bloomfield is just about 25,000 people. So again, we are like right on that line. So just for some interest about our denomination. Now this one's a little harder to interpret, but basically this is a chart. The date starts in 1616 when the first church that was in the United Church of Christ was founded, and then goes all the way to 2019. That's a chart of how many churches were built during that period of time. So a few were built in 1616 to 1699. Then that next category, which is a little bigger, but not many churches at all, between 1700 and 1749 is the period of time we were built, 1738. So we are among the oldest congregations, one of the longest standing congregations in the history of the United Church of Christ, which makes it one of the longest standing churches in the history of the country. So one of the benefits of having a national place that you support, and we tend to put in like about, I think this, our budget this year is like around $7,000, something like that, going to the United Church of Christ. When you take 4,700 churches and you pool those funds, you can do things at scale that you can't do as an individual church. So there are 100 people full-time employed spread throughout 42 countries, in addition to volunteers who do various types of work, who do social justice work, who do crisis work, who do different relationship building work. So when there are crises in countries, that we can mobilize things very quickly because we have relationships with non-governmental organizations and relationships with government organizations and other charitable organizations. Now, in addition to that, and they're spread all over the place. You can see this chart from Europe to Asia to the Pacific and Southern Asia and Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean. All over the world where this stuff takes place. And there are all kinds of things that can be done. Like, for example, when the war in Ukraine, the latest war in Ukraine, began, and there was so much urgent need, we got a lot of supplies and got those shipped off. We also had donations. Some of those donations went directly to organizations that we personally knew, but a lot of that money that was donated went to the United Church of Christ Ukraine Fund, because they could mobilize that, ours in addition to the other, and take those millions of dollars and make real impact right at the border very quickly, because that presence already exists. And they have a wider church ministry that serves all kinds of people, feeds people, teaches them how to be able to do farming better, helps people in justice situations in all kinds of remarkable ways. Now, we're not just going to focus on the open and affirming thing, but I think it's informative. The United Church of Christ, when you take those 4,700 churches, about 1/3 of them are open and affirming. Now, open and affirming is generally kind of connected to the LGBTQIA justice movement, but it is not exclusively so. We've been open and affirming for 7 or 8 years and been doing really good work in terms of moving forward and at least being open in how we do that. We are respected here in the community for that. We are looked to, we are trusted, and we give support in a lot of ways to that community, even if they don't show up in the church all the time. A lot of people in the LGBTQIA plus community here really see us as their church, whether they walk through the doors or not. But even as a more progressive denomination, only 1/3 of our community faiths have taken that step to become an open and affirming congregation, which says a lot about how early we still are in this justice movement in so many different ways. But this isn't the only place. The UCC does a lot in racial justice, does a lot in environmental justice, does a lot in all kinds of different forms of justice work. Now, we're also part of something called the Southern New England Conference. The Southern New England Conference is our immediate conference area, and that is made up of 3 states. It's made up of Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. And up until that's only been established 3 years ago. It used to be independent conferences for Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. And now we are one. We are one conference, and go ahead, Del. So, and interesting, a lot of places work really hard to create vision statements and write, and they parse words and stuff. And one of the things that the Southern New England Conference, when they built this, decided to do was take a vision statement directly out of Scripture. I'm not going to read this verbatim to you. You can read this, and the folks on the screen, can read this. But what I think is really interesting here is the choice of language that talks about us as a body, right? You hear the thing about ligaments, and we're one, and one in Christ, and one through Jesus, and that kind of thing, which is very similar language that we hear in Corinthians, which is not entirely surprising because Paul wrote this letter too, right? So that consistent theme of us being one body and connected, even if we're like part of the arm and the other part, that the ligaments of the Spirit are holding us together and keep us together. Now, the Southern New England Conference has 600 churches between those three states, and we've got about 115,000 members that can be brought to bear. Now, this conference is much tighter knit than the national, and our executive director is Reverend Darrell Goodwin, who is an exceptional leader, a wonderful human being, and we have the great benefit of having a closer connection with him as a community of faith because he lives right here in Bloomfield. His first message that he preached when he became the executive director was here. Preached at my installation, which he doesn't do very often, which is a wonderful thing, but he's a tremendous human being, love his husband Kenny, but is a real tremendous resource for us as a community of faith. But a little bit more about what we have going here. What do they do? Like, what do they do for us? How does it help us when we do this in addition to the charitable work that happens? Well, at the Southern New England Conference level, there's that kind of action as well, where when something happens, like not that long ago, a church in the UCC burned down from a lightning strike. Another one burned down not that long ago because of electrical problems, which is one of the main reasons you hear council and us like upgrading the electric systems throughout this, throughout the church. It's important these things happen, but the Southern New England Conference, the UCC, can respond immediately in ways that individual churches cannot on their own, or would be overwhelming if 600 churches went to one of the churches that burned down. When you have a single place you can go to help them, that's very important. But in addition to that, it has a lot of resources for people like myself and Doreen. There's training, there are support organizations, there are retreats, there are different educational programs that are available to us, but also for the leadership of the church and anybody here, if you want to tap into that stuff, there are all kinds of other resources. There are seminars that you can attend online or in person on social justice, on environmental justice, on all kinds of things, on church basics, on church finance, on administration, on what you do when everything around you is falling apart, what you do in the middle of a crisis. There are just so many sources of support. The other thing is we own a retreat center. The Southern New England Conference of the United Church of Christ owns a remarkable retreat center called Silver Lake. Many children in this community of faith have attended Silver Lake. Maybe some of your children or grandchildren or nephews or nieces or people who you take care of or other people went through this. It is a tremendous resource, and during the summer it's usually for the youth of the church, but not exclusively so. But in the other times, if you want to learn more about Silver Lake and go there, there are all kinds of wonderful programs that you can go to and enjoy and appreciate from Silver Lake. So if you'd like to learn more about that, you can let us know. But the core of the Southern New England Conference is social justice ministries. Now, many of you here have been appropriately vocal about saying, why doesn't the conference do more about this? And for a long time as a Connecticut conference, we were not great about this. As the Southern New England Conference, one of the core things about this group and about Reverend Goodwin's leadership and the team he's put together is about social justice issues. A lot around racial justice, a lot around increasing the visibility of the United Church of Christ in this area to our political figures, to our civic figures, and aligning more and more in communities and partnerships. If you're interested, in October 7th in Boston, there is a whole justice summit taking place, but also women's issues, racial issues, LGBTQIA issues, environmental issues. These are all justice issues that the Southern New England Conference has made the core focus of what they want to be about. So one of the questions we have as a church going forward is how much do we just want to, and I'm not saying just as a negative thing, how much do we want to just say, no, we're good focusing on Bloomfield and the greater surrounding areas and we're going to keep doing what we're doing, or how much would we be interested in partnering more actively with the wider church to tap into those 115,000 people in the Southern New England Conference who can go rally together and do things and work with legislators and coordinate in different ways, or how much do we want to try to tap into the national resources of what we do and leverage the 470,000 people who might be able to, obviously we're not going to get 470,000 people to all pull in the same direction. It's hard to get 7 people to do that, right? But at least we can tap into the power of that and see what we're interested in doing. And that's one of the things that we're going to want to talk about and debate and discuss how we want to align. Now, what are some of those things that we might align on? Come back next week for First Fruits and the future of the UCC. We will talk about what some of those opportunities are. Amen.